Before Lilith was named demon, before she was exiled to the edges of myth and cast as warning or threat, she existed as a sovereign being formed from the same breath and earth as Adam. In the oldest strands of myth, Lilith is not born from a rib or shaped as an afterthought, but created equal in substance and spirit. This detail is not incidental. It is the foundation of everything that follows. As a practicing witch devoted to Lilith, I do not approach her story as a tale of corruption or descent, but as one of remembrance. Lilith before the fall is not innocent, nor is she corrupted, she is complete. In early Mesopotamian mythology, long before her name became tangled in later religious fear, Lilith appears as a liminal figure of the night winds, associated with independence, sexuality, and untamed feminine force. These origins matter because they reveal her as a spirit aligned with thresholds rather than hierarchies. She does not belong to order imposed from above, but to the raw, living current of creation itself. In my practice, this is why Lilith often arrives not through rigid ritual, but through moments of deep personal truth. When the masks fall away and the self is encountered without apology. The later Jewish myth of Lilith as Adam's first wife crystallizes her essence with striking clarity. She refuses to lie beneath him, not as an act of rebellion for rebellion's sake, but because she understands herself as his equal. The refusal is theological as much as it is bodily. It is a refusal of hierarchy, of domination masquerading as divine order. From a witch's perspective, this moment is not the beginning of sin, but the first spell of sovereignty ever cast by a woman who knew her worth. Lilith speaks the ineffable name of the divine, not to escape responsibility, but to reclaim authorship over her own being. Words have power, and she uses them with precision. Before the fall, Lilith is not chaotic. She is aligned. She knows her nature and refuses to fracture herself to fit a structure that denies it. This is where modern devotion often misunderstands her. Lilith is not rage without reason, nor darkness without wisdom. She is discernment sharpened by self-knowledge. When she leaves Eden, she is not cast out in shame. She walks away intact, carrying herself into the wild places where imposed law no longer reaches. In witchcraft, the wild is not absence of order, but presence of a different one. Ancient, intuitive, and deeply embodied. As a follower of Lilith, I experience her not as a distant myth, but as a current that awakens when one stops asking for permission to exist fully. She teaches through resonance rather than command. In ritual, she does not demand submission. She demands honesty. Before the fall, Lilith is already whole, and this wholeness is what threatens systems built on obedience. She mirrors back the parts of us that were never meant to be softened or made palatable. In this way, her myth is not ancient history, but an ongoing initiation. Lilith's origin story matters because it reveals what was lost when her name was turned into a curse. It shows us a feminine presence that does not exist to nurture others at the expense of herself, nor to redeem through suffering. She exists because she exists. And that is enough in my practice. Honoring Lilith before the fall means honoring the self before compromise, before silence, before the slow erosion that comes from being told who you must be to be worthy. She reminds us that sovereignty is not granted, it is remembered. To walk with Lilith from this origin point is to understand that her so-called fall was not a descent into darkness, but a refusal to abandon her own truth. The myth begins not with disobedience, but with self-recognition, and that, for many of us, is the most dangerous magic of all. When Lilith leaves Eden, the story does not pause. There is no silence, no repentance, no return to negotiate terms that would cost her essence. Her refusal to submit is not a single moment frozen in myth, but a living act that continues to echo wherever autonomy is claimed against imposed order. This refusal is often framed as rebellion. Yet in Lilith's current, it is something far older and far more sacred. It is alignment. To submit to a structure that denies one's nature is to fracture the soul. And Lilith will not fracture. Equality in Lilith's myth is not an abstract ideal. It is embodied truth, she does not ask to rule over Adam, nor to be worshipped above him. She asks only to stand beside him as she was created, formed of the same earth, animated by the same divine breath. When this is denied, the refusal becomes inevitable. From a witch's perspective, this moment reveals Lilith as a guardian of balance rather than chaos. She exposes the lie that hierarchy is divinely ordained when it is, in fact, socially constructed and spiritually corrosive. In my devotion, Lilith teaches that submission without consent is not sacred. This teaching extends beyond relationships and into the ways power is exercised over bodies, desires, voices, and spiritual paths. Her myth becomes a mirror for anyone who has been told that love requires self-erasure, or that holiness requires obedience without question. Lilith refuses not because she is defiant by nature, but because she understands that true union cannot exist where equality is denied. There is no intimacy without sovereignty. The act of refusal is often romanticized or demonized, but rarely understood. Refusal costs Lilith everything she was promised by Eden. Yet she does not cling to false security. She chooses exile over containment, knowing that a life lived in alignment, even in solitude or shadow, is preferable to comfort purchased through self-betrayal. In witchcraft, this choice is deeply initiatory. It marks the point where the practitioner stops asking external systems to validate their magic and begins to trust the authority of their own lived truth. Lilith's refusal also reveals the fear embedded in patriarchal myth-making. A woman who will not submit cannot be controlled, and what cannot be controlled must be reframed as dangerous. This is where the seeds of demonization are planted. But at this stage of the myth, Lilith remains untouched by that distortion. She is still simply herself, walking into the wilderness with her power intact. She does not curse Eden, she outgrows it. Working with Lilith in practice often begins here. At the crossroads of truth and comfort, she asks difficult questions without softening them. Where have you bent yourself to be acceptable? Where have you mistaken endurance for virtue? Where have you called submission love because the alternative felt too frightening to claim? These are not intellectual inquiries, but somatic ones. Lilith's lessons are felt in the body, in the tightening of the throat when truth goes unspoken, and in the release that comes when it finally is. This refusal is not loud, it is resolute. Lilith does not beg to be understood, and she does not seek permission to leave. She names herself through action. In doing so, she becomes a living archetype of sacred defiance. Not as opposition for its own sake, but as devotion to self-integrity. To follow Lilith is to learn that saying no can be an act of devotion, and that walking away can be a spell of preservation. From this refusal, everything else unfolds. The wilderness awaits, and with it, the slow and deliberate transformation of Lilith from sovereign woman into something the world can no longer categorize or control. Once Lilith steps beyond the boundaries of Eden, the narrative shifts not because she has changed, but because the lens through which she is seen begins to harden with fear. Exile is not merely a change of location. It is the moment when sovereignty becomes threatening to those who depend on obedience. In myth, exile is often framed as punishment. Yet for Lilith, it functions as transformation. Removed from the structure that sought to define her, she enters a space where definition itself dissolves. This is where power begins to deepen rather than diminish. The wilderness Lilith enters is not empty. It is alive with forces older than law and untouched by moral hierarchy. Here, she is no longer required to justify her existence or temper her nature. In witchcraft, the wild has always been a place of initiation, where the self is stripped of imposed identity and reshaped through direct communion with instinct. Shadow and truth, Lilith's exile mirrors the witch's path precisely. When one leaves sanctioned spirituality behind, the world may call it loss, but the soul recognizes it as return. It is in this space that demonization begins to take root. Lilith's refusal to submit and her continued survival outside divine order destabilize the narrative of control. Rather than acknowledge her autonomy, Later traditions recast her as dangerous, predatory, and corrupting. This is not mythic accident but psychological necessity for systems that rely on compliance. A woman who thrives without permission must be reframed as monstrous. Or others might follow. As a devotee of Lilith, I understand demonization not as a fall from grace, but as a projection of fear onto what cannot be dominated. Shadow is born here not as evil, but as the repository for everything that polite spirituality rejects. Lilith becomes associated with night, sexuality, rage, and untamed desire because these forces refuse to be sanitized. In my practice, shadow work with Lilith is not about purging these qualities, but reclaiming them as sacred. She teaches that what is buried alive within us does not disappear. It waits. The shadow grows not because it is wrong, but because it has been denied expression. Lilith's transformation into a demon figure reflects a broader cultural fear of feminine autonomy, especially when it is embodied rather than theoretical. She does not simply think freely. She desires freely. She does not merely exist. She chooses herself repeatedly. This combination is intolerable to hierarchical systems. And so, the wild feminine is named monstrous, even as it continues to give life to magic, creativity, and liberation at the edges. In devotion, Lilith does not ask to be rescued from this shadowed role. She inhabits it fully. She teaches that power does not require purity and that holiness does not require submission. The witch who walks with Lilith learns to stand in her own shadow without flinching, to recognize anger as information, desire as wisdom, and solitude as a crucible rather than a wound. Exile becomes initiation. The demon mask becomes a crown. This is also where Lilith begins to operate as a liminal guide rather than a domestic deity. She meets practitioners in moments of rupture, during awakenings that cost relationships, identities, and former certainties. She does not soothe the grief of loss, but an expansion of it beyond walls, rules, and names. The wild feminine is not created here. She is unveiled. Lilith does not become something new in exile. She becomes visible in her fullness. And as the myths grow darker around her, her power grows quieter, deeper, and more enduring from this place of shadowed sovereignty. She begins to teach not just refusal, but reclamation. From exile into power, the night opens wider, and Lilith steps fully into her dominion. As Lilith settles into the night, her dominion becomes unmistakable. Darkness is no longer something that happens to her. It is something she moves within with intention and mastery. The night, in her myth, is not absence or negation, but a fertile expanse where desire breathes without surveillance. This is where Lilith's power becomes most misunderstood and most feared. Sexual sovereignty, when claimed without apology, threatens every structure built on control of the body and the spirit alike. Lilith's association with sexuality is not rooted in excess or temptation, but in ownership. She desires because she chooses to, not because she is compelled or lacking. In patriarchal myth, this distinction is erased deliberately. Desire that is self-directed cannot be regulated, and so it is reframed as dangerous. Lilith becomes the seductress, the corrupter, the devourer of men, not because she preys upon them, but because she refuses to center them. From a witch's perspective, this reframing is one of the oldest spells of distortion ever cast. In my practice, Lilith's erotic current is not about performance or provocation. It is about embodiment. She teaches that desire is a language the body speaks when it feels safe enough to tell the truth. Working with Lilith often awakens sensations that have been numbed through shame, suppression, or survival. She does not impose desire. She uncovers it, and when desire returns, it does so with memory, revealing where pleasure was once denied or made conditional. The night Lilith rules is intimate, not indulgent. It is the space where one meets themselves without the glare of expectation. Sexual sovereignty, in this context, extends beyond sex itself and into creative force, magnetism, and the ability to say yes or no without explanation. Lilith's Eros is not consumptive. It is generative, it creates worlds, boundaries, and self-trust. To follow her here is to relearn how to inhabit the body as sacred territory rather than contested ground. This reclamation often arrives with discomfort. When desire has been policed, reclaiming it can feel destabilizing. Lilith does not soften this process. She does not promise ease, she promises truth. In ritual and devotion, she appears not as a fantasy but as a mirror, asking where desire has been confused with obligation, where pleasure has been rationed, and where the body has been treated as something to endure rather than inhabit. These revelations are not gentle, but they are liberating. Lilith's erotic power also dismantles the false divide between spirit and flesh. She does not ascend by denying the body, nor does she descend by indulging it mindlessly. She dwells in the integration of both. This is why she resonates so strongly with witches whose paths are embodied, intuitive and grounded in lived experience rather than abstract doctrine. She teaches that the body is not a barrier to the sacred, but one of its most articulate expressions. As mistress of the night, Lilith holds space for desire without moral hierarchy. She does not label longing as pure or impure. She asks only whether it is true. This is deeply threatening to systems that require guilt to function. A woman who trusts her desire cannot be easily manipulated. A practitioner who listens to their body cannot be easily deceived. Lilith's Eros sharpens discernment as much as it awakens pleasure. From this place of sexual sovereignty, Lilith's myth expands again. Desire, once reclaimed, begins to create. And what is created in the night is not always gentle, nor is it always welcome. From the depths of her autonomy and Eros, Lilith becomes something the world names monstrous, because it does not yet understand creation that answers to no authority but its own. From here, the story turns toward what is born when desire is fully owned, and why the world feared it enough to name it a curse. What is born from unregulated desire is rarely welcomed by the world that sought to contain it. As Lilith's sovereignty, shadow, and Eros converge, creation follows inevitably. Yet what she creates does not resemble the sanctioned life of Eden. It does not exist to uphold order, to soothe or to redeem, and so, what emerges from Lilith is named monstrous. This naming is not a reflection of inherent corruption, but of refusal to conform. The monster is simply that which escapes classification. In myth, Lilith becomes the mother of demons, a figure whose fertility is reframed as threat rather than miracle. This shift reveals one of the deepest fears embedded in patriarchal cosmology: creation that answers to no authority but the creator herself. Lilith does not birth to serve lineage, legacy, or divine mandate. She creates because creation is her nature. From a witch's perspective, this is sacred power in its rawest form. It is magic unbound by approval. Rage enters the myth here, not as something Lilith succumbs to, but as something she carries with clarity. Her rage is not chaos, it is memory. It remembers every boundary crossed, every truth denied, every attempt to rewrite her autonomy as sin. In my practice, Lilith's rage is never reckless. It is surgical. It burns away what was built on falsehood and leaves what is real standing. To work with her is to learn that anger, when honored, can be an instrument of protection and creation rather than destruction. The monsters Lilith births are reflections of what society refuses to integrate. They embody hunger, instinct, otherness, and unfiltered truth. These qualities are not evil, but they are inconvenient. They disrupt narratives of purity and control. In witchcraft, monsters are often guardians, threshold keepers, and initiators. They test those who approach power without self-knowledge. Lilith's children stand at the edges of myth not to terrorize, but to protect what has been exiled from the center. To claim Lilith as mother of monsters is to reject the false hierarchy of acceptable and unacceptable selves. It is to understand that what has been labeled grotesque within us often holds our most vital life force. In devotion, Lilith does not ask practitioners to purify themselves before approaching her. She asks them to bring everything, especially what has been hidden. Shame dissolves quickly in her presence because she does not flinch from it. She recognizes it as a byproduct of suppression, not a truth. Creation born from rage and autonomy is often misunderstood because it does not seek consensus. Lilith's generative power does not ask to be liked. It asks to be real. This is deeply unsettling in spiritual spaces that prioritize harmony over honesty. Lilith reminds us that forced harmony is a lie, and that true balance often requires rupture first. Her monsters are not mistakes. They are evidence that life continues beyond permission. As a practicing witch, I have found that Lilith's maternal current is not soft, but it is fiercely protective. She teaches how to hold what is wild without attempting to tame it. She shows how to nurture power without neutralizing it. This kind of mothering does not coddle, but it does not abandon. It stands beside creation as it grows teeth and learns how to survive in a world that fears it. From here, Lilith is no longer just a figure in myth. She becomes an archetype that lives within the psyche, the body, and the spiritual path itself. The monster, once externalized, turns inward, asking to be understood rather than destroyed. And in answering that call, the practitioner steps fully into the next phase of Lilith's current, where shadow is no longer feared, but consciously integrated. From mother to mirror, Lilith's work deepens. Once the monster is no longer external, Lilith's presence shifts from mythic figure to living archetype. She moves inward, inhabiting the psyche as the shadow feminine. Not as something to be overcome, but as something to be known. At this stage, Lilith no longer appears primarily through stories told about her, but through the moments in our own lives where we encounter resistance, desire, anger, and truth simultaneously. She becomes less a goddess to observe and more a force that asks to be embodied. The shadow feminine Lilith represents is not simply the opposite of the light. It is the accumulation of everything that has been pushed out of view in order to maintain social harmony and spiritual palatability. She holds the parts of the self that learn to stay quiet to remain loved, to shrink to remain safe, and to separate body from spirit to remain acceptable. Working with Lilith here is not dramatic or performative. It is slow, intimate, and often unsettling. She reveals what has been disowned not to punish, but to restore wholeness. In my practice, Lilith appears most strongly during moments of inner contradiction, when the desire to be seen collides with the fear of consequence. She does not resolve these tensions for you. She sharpens them until clarity emerges. This is the essence of self-knowing. Rather than offering comfort, Lilith offers precision. She asks where truth has been edited for survival and whether that strategy is still necessary. These questions cannot be answered intellectually. They are answered through lived experience and embodied choice. As an archetype, Lilith dismantles the false binary between victim and villain. She exposes how easily autonomy is reframed as threat and how often self-protection is mistaken for cruelty. This revelation can be deeply destabilizing, especially for those conditioned to equate goodness with self-sacrifice. Lilith does not reward martyrdom. She reveals its cost. In doing so, she offers a different model of power, one that is rooted in integrity rather than approval. Shadow work with Lilith is not about indulging every impulse, nor is it about moral collapse. It is about discernment reclaimed from external authority. She teaches that knowing oneself includes knowing one's capacity for destruction as well as creation. Denying either leads to unconscious expression. Integrating both leads to choice. This is why Lilith's current often attracts witches who are done pretending they are harmless. Harmlessness is not the same as harmless choice. At this stage of devotion, Lilith no longer needs to shock. She no longer needs to provoke. Her work becomes subtler and more exacting. She asks for consistency between inner truth and outer life. She reveals where the self is split, where desire says one thing and action says another. This is not judgment, it is invitation. To know oneself fully is to reclaim power that was previously leaking through denial. Lilith as archetype does not belong only to women, but she manifests most clearly in those who have been taught to fear their own depth. She appears wherever autonomy has been suppressed and wherever desire has been moralized into silence. To walk with her here is to accept that liberation is not an event, but a practice. It is the daily act of choosing alignment over approval, even when the cost is discomfort or loss. From this place of self-knowing, devotion begins to change form. Lilith is no longer approached only through myth or inner work, but through conscious relationship. The archetype steps back into presence. The mirror becomes a companion, and the path turns from understanding Lilith to actively walking with her.